Hello everyone, this is another Oldham video review. We are out in the Highlands of Scotland today. We've come up, this is our third day I think in the Scottish Highlands, or second day proper in the Scottish Highlands.
Yep.
So we're at Glencoe. We've got a nice background here. We've tried to get as much of the mountains in the background as possible, however it's quite moory, it's quite wet.
It was quite a trek to get up here.
Indeed.
I've got my running shorts on because it's a little bit more comfortable. I say comfortable, we're sitting on the most jagged rocks in the world, but honestly if you look around and see how sort of craggy these hills are,
just once you're done watching this video, just go to Google Images and type in Glencoe and you'll see where we are.
I believe that these are really the best seats that we can find.
Yeah. So, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be reviewing, Ryan's going to be reviewing The King of Elfland's Daughter, which is, I believe, it might have been the first video that I reviewed on Oldham.
Oh really?
I think so. Actually, I think it was.
We did talk about King of Elfland's Daughter in the last video with Stephen, the round table discussion.
Indeed, and that was the impetus for Ryan starting The King of Elfland's Daughter.
It took, with work and so on, it took me maybe about a month to read it. I could have read it faster than that, but I had other projects and, like I say, work going on at the same time.
Indeed. So, Ryan's just going to give us general thoughts about it, and I'll probably prod him about how he found the book compared to Piranesi in terms of the process of reading and what sort of imagery it stirred up for fantasy and all that sort of stuff.
And what better place to talk about fantasy as I just look behind and see these incredible mountains.
Indeed, we've got our sword with us, we've got our cloak, we've got our...
that sword, we should just say, is for another video that we may record today.
Indeed.
I just want to say before we begin this review of King of Elfland's Daughter, I had written down a lot of notes on the pages themselves, but about 2 hours into the drive up to Scotland, of which was like a 7-hour drive, I realised that I had forgotten the book, which was pretty disappointing, to be honest. I had lots of notes written down.
Yeah.
And I was going to go page by page and read you some quotes, but nobody's got the book here, so I'm just going to have to do it completely by memory.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's reminiscent of the Piranesi issue where, well, you can still talk about it, of course, but actually that happened similar, didn't it, with our dog?
We had another copy at that point, but this, I'm just sad because I had so many things written down, like page by page. This is what I think, and I'm going to have to try and recall all that.
Yeah,
as we go.
It's unfortunate. And obviously I read the book about 4.5 years ago. However, I did obviously do the review in 2020. But for me, I think this is really going to be a discussion of sort of just fantasy imagery and inspiration and sort of magic and being out in the Highlands and whatnot. So as much as you can remember. So can I get your thoughts on what you thought the book was going to be about and the language and the style, just as much as possible in terms of the feeling of the book?
So I'll start by saying that with work and other hobbies and so on, it's still a struggle to read as much as I'd like. Yeah. But this one I didn't think was going to be so difficult because of the way you described the book to me initially.
Yeah.
You described it as a very easy to read, simplistic almost fantasy novel.
It is. Yeah, I think it's definitely. For me, it wasn't a plot book, and that's why I thought it might be a bit easier to get into.
You described it to me as sort of a role-playing game condensed, like an RPG book. This is going to be a really easy, cosy read.
Especially at the start, I think.
Definitely.
That's one of my favourite parts of it, and I think for you as well.
Yes, I would just say that, speaking of the start, I would say that I enjoyed the start of the book the most. I was even messaging you at the time saying, oh, this is just so incredible, and giving you different quotes and so on. I really liked the start of the book most, and that's when it felt most magical fantasy RPG. This is such a cosy little read, and I was skimming through the chapters because it was so easy.
Yeah, I have to admit my sort of perception of the book really comes from the beginning and the middle part, I think. I don't think, I will go into the flaws of the book, of course, but for me it's all about the RPG, quintessential RPG adventure, especially when Alveric, he's getting his sword and he's getting his leather worked satchel or whatever it was.
It definitely has that feeling of an RPG, you know, when a character is starting out, like in an MMORPG like World of Warcraft, if the viewers are familiar. You start your character from nothing, from level 1, and Alveric, Alveric, his father, it starts him off on a quest from the very beginning of the book. He says, the people of Errol, the 12 men, have come to him in the parliament and said, we want to bring, we want change in Errol, the Valley of Errol.
We would be ruled by a magic lord.
Yeah, so they're after magic, and so Alvaric's father appoints him with the task of going to Elfland and wedding the
King of Elfland's
daughter. So then he sets out on his quest, the hero's quest, to go and
to go through the border of Twilight, to go to
to go into Elfland, this fabled land. And that's what I was going to say. It feels very much like an RPG because you're starting from level 1, so to say.
And the fields we know for us would be like Northshire, places like that. Like
anywhere that you start a game, really, it's some peaceful land.
Indeed.
He finds a witch's hut where he crafts his magic sword. He gets ready. He goes to a leather workers and does certain things there. And he sets out on his quest, which is just such a great feeling to. Just the start of a book, really.
Yeah, I when I recommended it to you, I thought this was definitely be like the beginnings of fantasy, 1920s. All the quintessential elements, very nice and pleasant to read.
Obviously, it inspired Tolkien in some sense. So I was thinking this is going to be quite simplistic and maybe tame, with like certain elements and archetypes that are not so far flung, quite simple, like fairy stories and things like that. And I think it does stick to that like core basis of standard fantasy, but it does. I was going to say it expands a little bit, but it actually stays in the very core of what we would now consider fantasy. There's no things like, I've never heard of that before.
Well, that's the thing. I think mostly Tolkien was inspired by the Pagana mythology, mostly believe it or not, the darker aspects, the Mana Yutsushai, all that stuff that Dunsany did.
Right.
But, yeah, so it's a quintessential adventure fantasy.
I was playing. Sorry, people. The sun is so. It's really burning my back right now. It's quite pleasant, but I just had
warm.
to. I was playing.
Sun's going down a bit.
I was playing the game Elden Ring, and there's this event that happens in the game from every now and again where lightning comes down and strikes the ground, and that made me think of the part where the witch Zerindurel crafts lightning bolts into Alvaric's sword. So that just gave me. I know you shouldn't base everything on games, but it just really made me think. That I can. It's reminding me of something in Elden Ring.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
What did you think about the constant repetition in the book? Did you think it was? Because he's a good writer, and he goes off on all these different tangents and this wonderful prose and things like that. But what do you think the purpose is? It like the Iliad where you're supposed to repeat it? Because this is obviously a spoiler review, but he goes at the end of the book. He says something, and he mentions the fields we know. Now, is the repetition? Is that why he repeats the fields we know so much? The palace that's only told of in song.
See, in my original review, and all the discussions I've had with you and Stephen, I said that the fields we know is this quintessential, very evocative and powerful sentiment. Right.
I agree with that.
But then, to be honest, I think that he repeated it far too much. Looking back, when you were reading it out, because I was like, when you were reading it, I sort of traced through it as well. And because it's not just the fields we know, is it? That it's repeated. There's certain parts told of in song, etc.
Beyond the fields we know, palace told of only in song, and there's many other things that are repeated. And I thought this might be a stylistic choice.
It can be a technique, but I don't know if it's necessarily like it's not exactly oratory or anything like that.
It's almost like a crutch more than anything, because I was thinking there might be a purpose to this repetition, but there comes a point when you are 3/4 of the way through the book and you're still reading how nothing escapes over the border of Twilight from the lands, the fields we know to Elfland, and you think, but I've heard of that before. I know that's the case. So why, Dunsany, do you still need to say that to us? So I was wondering if you knew why he repeats himself so much.
To be honest, I don't. I remember liking parts of it. I remember thinking the language is very crisp and well crafted. But if I'm being honest, when I read it parts of it back, I did feel like it was parts too long, too many sentences being repeated, a little bit. Obviously, the unicorn chapter is very slow paced, and I'm aware. Unfortunately, I'm aware of the faults. Just to speak in more general terms, I'm aware of the faults of the book more than I was in the past. But I still think, if you don't think of it as a plot book and you think of it as this sort of dreamlike thing, as an artifact, it's better. But
I'd agree with that, and I completely agree that it's well crafted and he has some of the best description of nature that I've ever read.
Yeah.
Which is why I wish I had the book here to read you some quotes right now.
Yeah.
But I would say that's the first main flaw of the book, is that it's very repetitive to the point where maybe not because of the repetition, but it's also the repetitive descriptions repetitious where I would almost maybe skipped 3 passages from time to time, just in total, because I just thought I've read this before and it did kind of bore me, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to look into that. I think there's definitely obviously a technique, like you said, the Iliad before. There's certain oratory principles, I think, where the speaker is standing on a platform and saying something out loud, and it's meant as a mnemonic or whatever.
Because it was repeated so much that I did wonder if that was the reason why he did it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any call for that in a prose book, but
the other thing that came to mind at the start of the book, what did you think about the scale of everything? Because I don't know if it's the way that Dunsany describes it, but Alveric goes through the border of Twilight and finds Elfland, and it's not long until he finds the centre of Elfland, and I was thinking, everything just feels very closed in. Like, they didn't have to go far from Errol to find Elfland. Now, granted, they travel about 10 years up in the north, and it is our world, as I think we find out.
I don't think it's supposed to be like, I'm not sure what the word is for this, but there's a certain like folkish, fable-ish element where I've read things like the Mabinogion, where the Mabinogion, the protagonists in those stories, they'll very quickly enter the magical realm, the fairy. So it's not.
I understand that. It's just, it felt strange to me. Maybe because Alveric goes through the border of Twilight into Elfland. He meets. There's a battle with some trees. He meets 4 or 5 knights,
the Elf Nation.
And then he suddenly meets the queen. The princess.
Yeah. Lyrzel, yeah.
I definitely think, apart from the repetition, my biggest negatives of King of Elfland's Daughter was the relationship between characters. Now, it's obviously a fantasy story, so we need to give some leeway to fantasy tropes where things aren't believable. You need to suspend a little bit of disbelief.
Yeah.
But I didn't quite find Alveric and Lyrzel's relationship that believable. Yeah. And I also found it strange that Alveric leaves on a 10-year journey up into the north to find Elfland, but Orien has no sort of bitterness, or he doesn't hold it against his father when he abandons him for 10 years, really. Now, that's all sorted out at the end of the book, where Alveric comes back and sort of Elfland has some time magic where the time that they've spent apart and all that tragedy is like healed in the end. I just think there's a lot to say on that, and maybe we'll talk about it another time when I actually have my notes with me. But
so the ending, I know that a lot of people who've read The King of Elfland's Daughter, they said that it's a nice thing that the mundanity of Errol is sort of washed away by this magic line, the shining line. However, it's almost like a Deus Ex Machina, where things just occur, things are just happening, and Zerundorel is on this peak or hill, I think she is, and she's looking out over everything. You were just reading this in the car just today.
I wasn't a fan of the ending, to be honest. I thought it was going to be very tragic. Maybe Alveric and Lyrzel don't meet up again. I thought it is tragic for the men of Errol that think that now too much magic has come to Errol, and they have to now make a plan and probably leave their home, because I wasn't as tragic as I wanted it, because really the whole book, it
almost seems like Alveric's quest doesn't really impact him in a way, or because everything, it's like a Deus Ex Machina, everything
it's healed in time.
It's healed in time. So thanks for watching, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the review, second review of King of Elfland's Daughter. Obviously in Scotland, it's been a nice time.
It was nice. Now it's quite windy and blustery. But
hopefully you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time.